Hello and welcome to the garden. Well, I've got one simple job to do today, and that is to replace the pear on the end of our row of cordons here. So that is our earliest fruiting variety, and it's had a few issues for a couple of years. It is still fruiting extremely well, but the plant itself isn't that happy. So I've bought a replacement. It arrived in between the recent storm, so I just heeled it in to one of our veg beds, and I will lift that and get it in place here. So I've bought an early variety. It's Precoce de Trevoux, and that one I'm not so familiar with. It comes from a place just north of Lyon on the Rhone there. It's supposed to be one of the finest tasting of the early pears, so I'm really looking forward to getting some fruit in a couple of years' time. It is replacing what I think is possibly the earliest fruiting of the pears. I certainly don't know one that will fruit before this. That is the summer doyenne. Now, if you were planting 2 or 3 varieties of pear, I wouldn't really recommend incorporating one of the early fruiting sorts, and that's simply because the quality of the fruit is more or less in all regards better for the later fruiting sorts. They will be more aromatic, the quality of the flesh will be better, and they will keep for longer. As soon as you get to a larger collection, 4, 5, 6 trees, then it's well worth thinking about one of the early varieties. And I always think it's a little bit of a pity that they've fallen out of favour, and you never see one of the early apples or pears in the shops anymore. They can always import one of the main crop varieties from somewhere else, or they can store them for long periods. But anyway, that is a ridiculously early pear, the summer doyenne. It is packed up for winter before its neighbour here, which is Louise Bon. That's a reasonably early pear. It's not a late one by any means, but before this one is even thinking about getting ripe, summer doyenne is packed up for winter. It really is very odd. It is a very reliable little thing. The pears are pretty small, surprisingly so. I think in the old days there were lots of varieties of pear and apple that had quite small fruits, and they didn't seem to care back then. I don't think they go down very well with the supermarkets today. Everything's got to be kind of uniform and a sensible size, but some of the smaller fruited sorts are very pleasant indeed. I don't think there's anything much smaller than this one. The fruits are very pleasant so long as you get to them at the right moment, and they really don't keep more than a week or so, so it's a very short season. Anyway, we have enjoyed that pear. If you're ever looking for something that will suit a small corner, maybe even in a pot, that's not a bad option, because it's not very vigorous at all. And in fact, I ought to have put that on a bigger rootstock. So when you're picking a rootstock, you've got to match not only your soil conditions. So if you're planting in fine, rich soil, you might choose a slightly less vigorous rootstock. If you're planting in poor conditions, you want something with more vigor. You've also got to match the rootstock with the scion, the variety you want to grow on it, and that's because they vary hugely in vigor as well. So in this case, it's a weak growing tree. I should have put that on a more vigorous rootstock. Never mind. It doesn't matter now, it is coming out. The one that's going in, I have that on a pretty vigorous rootstock, probably too vigorous in theory for a cordon, but I'm replanting here. So when you're replanting any member of the rose family, and that includes almost all of the top fruit you might think of growing, so your apples and pears, they can all suffer from replant disease. That's not a specific disease, it's a sort of catch-all term for a build-up of soil-borne pathogens that when you stick your new tree in the ground, it gets really rather upset. And if you're familiar with growing roses or know anybody who is, it's really common with roses to have a problem. If you pull one out and stick a replacement in, they don't like it. Now, what I should have done was take this tree out a lot earlier. This should have come out after it had fruited last year, and I didn't. I've left it in there, which means I haven't prepared this site for replanting. I should have at least given that a really hefty mulch with organic matter. There are a few other things that you can do to mitigate replant disease. Tagetes are quite handy for some of the reasons that gardeners often grow tagetes all over the place. They are handy in the ground here where you want to replant. They help to deal with certain of the nematodes, and brassica seed meal has been shown to be fairly useful, and that deals with certain of the other pathogens, but I'm not using any of those. All I'm going to do is pull this fella out, and then I'll incorporate a little bit of lime. Now, the pears don't generally want limey conditions. They don't like it. The rootstocks don't like it. However, my soil here is a little on the acidic side. It's had quite a bit of horse compost on it over the years, and that will have a slight acidifying effect as well. So there's no problem with me adding a little bit of lime and a little change to the pH. That can have an impact on the soil life, and that should also help with the replant disease. So I'll give it a little bit of lime in the planting hole. I'll also add plenty of mycorrhizal fungi. It's something I do quite often, particularly with bare root trees and bushes, but I will definitely want to put that here because that can really help the plant to get established. So hopefully the new tree will settle down. I did the same thing with 3 apple trees last year, and it looks as though they are getting settled down. I mean, they're not the most vigorous specimens, but I think they will be all right, and I hope I will get away with it here too. Anyway, let me show you the problem with this specimen. So you can see at the end here, I have decapitated this in a previous season. It was a lot longer, but it developed this split all the way down the stem, a sort of spiral split. And if I take the camera a bit closer, you can probably see that running down there. And that's not good. I don't know what that is exactly, but it's not healthy. It's not limited to the main stem either. I mean, this side branch here, this is really badly split. I think the thing is with this variety, it's really not growing. I never have to prune this. I don't have to do a thing with it. It is what it is, and it will never change. And if I cut this off, I'll have to cut right back to the main stem. But if I cut off any other damaged wood, I don't get any regrowth from it. This is a really weak growing tree. That's not a bad thing, so long as you've matched it properly to the soil conditions and the rootstock. You don't want trees that are getting out of hand, but this one could do with a little bit more vigor. Now you can see it's absolutely laden with blossom. There will be tons of fruit on here. Because the fruit are fairly small, you don't have to thin much or at all. And as a consequence, this will give a reasonable crop, even though the fruit is quite tiny. But I mean, it's a nice little tree, and as you can see, it is still flowering like mad. But its days are done, I'm afraid. I don't like these splits, and those splits are appearing all over the place. I'm really not sure what the cause is, but anyway, I'm going to get this out. You can see at the base of the tree here, I've got this carpet of growth. This is poached eggplant, and I put a few in last year because it's really effective at attracting some of the beneficial insects into the garden. If I remember rightly, I think lacewings in particular love this stuff. But if you do think about putting this in, just bear in mind that it will seed all over the place, and this is just thick with it. Oh, it's not going to cause me any trouble. I will leave it in undoubtedly, and yeah, it will just keep coming back. I will have to pull a little bit of it here so I can get at the bottom of this tree, but yeah, mad stuff this. It will go absolutely bonkers. Now, I don't know how much work I'm going to have to do here. I'm hoping that I can cut the ties and give this a bit of a heave-ho and pull the thing out, but it really does depend how much root this has put down. It wasn't on the strongest rootstock, so it's possible that I can just wiggle this one out. Otherwise, I'm going to have to get in there with a crowbar and a spade and see what I can do. This does feel like butchery because there's all this lovely blossom on here, and yeah, but it's not good. You can't have the stem splitting like that. If this isn't already badly diseased, it soon will be. So yeah, I've got to get that out. Let's have a little look. Oh, there's another tie. Oh dear. Yeah, this is going to take a bit of effort, I think. I can see a big old split down the bottom of the trunk there. That's not good at all. Right, time for some heavy weaponry. These are growing so close together, it might be sensible if I went along and just pulled these out and put new ones in. Right, let's find out where the roots are. Right. This doesn't feel like it's got a huge amount of root on it. I may need to cut something here. It's not like I can dig under the path. Great. I've snapped the cane. I will have to replace that. Oh, there it goes. You might as well give up now because you are coming out. Now, you couldn't do this with a really vigorous rootstock because they will put down some chunky old tap roots, but these tend to be fairly fibrous and there won't be too many of the stronger roots in there, so I think I should be able to get this out without too much effort. There we go. Now undoubtedly I've snapped a lot of those roots off, but that's fine. Well, this is interesting. That's not an entirely happy looking graft. You can see that split on the back of the trunk there, and also here. So I don't know if we've got a problem with the graft union. Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, hopefully the new tree will do a little bit better. I can't complain about the crops this has given us. They have been abundant each and every season, but there's something not right with this tree. So here's the little replacement, the Precoce de Trevoux, and it arrived before I was ready to set that down. So I heeled it in here. I laid it down at an angle so it wouldn't be too bothered by the high winds. Now all I need to do is just lift that carefully. When I planted this in again, I was careful to observe the previous soil mark, so I know where that is. It's not a bad little root, that. Quite happy with it. Yeah, there's some strong root, there's bits of fibrous root. Doesn't look too bad. I think this has a fair chance of getting established. So there are two rules when planting a cordon. The first is always to honour the original soil mark. That's the one thing I was careful with when I heeled this in, not to sink this any deeper. With woody stemmed plants, you do not want to plant more deeply. In general, there are just one or two exceptions. Currants are often sunk rather deeper, black currants. But with fruit trees, you don't want to plant any deeper than they were in either their pot, or these are bare root, so these were in a field somewhere in Kent. And the other thing is to put the graft union on the top, not like that. That's a weaker orientation. It's much stronger if you put it like that with the graft on top, and that's much less likely to then break here with a, let's say, a mechanical failure. So now I can just place that in the hole and see how it sits. Now this doesn't always work out perfectly when you're dealing with cordons, because you've got to get this in at an angle, so sometimes it's even necessary to trim a little bit of the root away. I think I will get away without having to do that this time. I do want to widen this a little bit here. Very pleased to see just how many worms there are in this soil. And I don't tend to feed this too much because I don't want too much vegetative growth on the pear trees. But the soil does seem to be in good condition. It had a heavy mulch last spring, and I probably won't do that again for a couple of years. There are worms everywhere. So that will sit there something like that. The soil level is about right. I can bend those roots down, get them in the ground, and I'll keep that graft at the top. That won't be too bad at all. So I want to work a little bit of lime into this planting hole. I'll get some on the soil that I'm going to backfill with. Then I've got the mycorrhizal fungi, so I'll put some in the bottom of the hole. And then I'll get this in place and dump a whole load more on it. Well, that's about where I want it. I'll make sure there's contact with the roots there. Bend these down, get them in the hole. So It's the old soil mark there. That's going to be perfect when I've filled this back up. Now, I know it's normal practice to get in there with your boot and have a good stomp around, but that is not something that I like to do. So what I will do is what my dad used to call puddling in. I will put a ton of water here and wash the soil around the roots. That's the way I was taught to do it by my dad, and that way makes a lot of sense to me. I don't like to get in there with my boot. Where's my watering can? Well, that's a good swampy mess. And a little bit of a jiggle. I can be fairly confident now that there is soil all around those roots. I can just fill that back in. This stuff is full of roots from these poached eggplants. Just pinching a bit of nice topsoil from the neighbouring bed just to finish covering that up. Right, that will do nicely. So as usual, I'm going to use this flexible, hollow, rubbery material to tie this in place. And what I might do first is trim some of this. Oh, no, maybe I'll tie it first. I put a couple of twists between the cane and the branch. And then, yeah, that'd be great. I do like this flexible material. You don't have to use this, but if you use something flexible, you're much less likely to girdle the stem or harm it in any way if you leave the tie in place for just a little bit too long, and that is very easily done. I have done that myself many times, but this stuff, it's got so much stretch. It's very strong. I've never seen it break, but it's got a lot of stretch to it. And it's pretty handy in this case. And my final job is just to shorten these laterals here. Now, I'm very happy with this plant because I've got lots of break down the bottom, and that's great. Now, if I didn't have all of this down the bottom end, I might be tempted to shorten this main stem. Because of what they call apical dominance, that's the dominance of the bud at the end here. This produces hormones that travel down the stem, and they tend to inhibit growth further down. So if you've got one long stem with no activity down the bottom, if you don't shorten this stem, there's a chance that you won't ever get decent branches down here. Now, I'm really fortunate. I can see there's a ton of branches here. All of these shoots here are fit to burst, so there's no reason for me, in this case, shortening the main stem. All I want to do is cut these back, and I will cut them to 3 buds. And normally you do this, of course, in summer pruning. 1, 2, 3. There's no point leaving these long, because they'll only start producing spurs out here. You want them up close if possible. They will eventually spread out and get quite big anyway. They don't need encouraging at this stage. And in the summer I will come along, and any regrowth from here I will cut back to just one bud. And well, that's one bud past the basal cluster. I do have a video on summer pruning which shows all of that. Anything coming off the main stem here, I will cut that back to 3 buds like I'm doing with these. I'll put a link to that pruning video, because if you're wondering at all about the pruning of cordon apples and pears, I do go into that in quite some detail. 1, 2, where's the third? Back there. Right, that job I think is done. So it's always exciting to do a little bit of tree planting, especially if it's a new variety that you've never grown before. Well, I say new variety, this one was found in around 1860, so it's a fairly old variety, but I haven't grown it before and I've not tasted it, so I'm quite keen to get my hands on some of the fruit. That probably won't be for 2 or 3 years' time. There's a chance it might produce a few blossoms next year, but if it does, it's a little bit doubtful whether the tree would carry the fruit. So yeah, I think 2 years at least before we get to see what this pear is actually like. That tree is looking absolutely perfect for a cordon. It's not too long. You see some that they've been hanging around, especially if they're in pots, they can sometimes hang around for far too long, and they're far too big with growth in all the wrong places. That one is just about perfect. It's got fantastic break all the way along the bottom. There are shoots right from the base all the way up that first section, and great big juicy growth buds along the rest of it. It is absolutely fantastic for this purpose, and in fact it would have made a really fine bush or half standard as well. Lots of choice for branches, lots of positions you could have successfully headed that tree at. So I'm very happy with that specimen. That one came from Keeper's Nursery. I have had some really nice trees from there, so that one looks to be another. So I am hopeful, if all goes well, in a couple of years' time we will get to taste this old French early pear, Precoce de Trevoux. Anyway, that is all for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.